The ongoing conflict in Gaza has brought with it an unprecedented human toll. But among the most alarming statistics is the number of journalists who've been killed while simply trying to do their jobs. According to various press freedom organizations, the conflict has become one of the deadliest in modern history for media workers, with hundreds of Palestinian journalists killed by Israeli military action. The staggering number has prompted a wave of international condemnation, but also raising serious questions about the safety of those on the front lines of reporting. Joining us to discuss the crisis and the implications for press freedom are two journalists who have spoken up: Atiyyah, who is with us in our Johannesburg studio, and Ireti Bakare-Yusuf, who joins us virtually from Nigeria. To the pair of you, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Atiyyah and Ireti, welcome to the program. We do acknowledge the killings of journalists in conflicts around the world, places like Sudan, Ukraine, Colombia, but we're focusing on the killings of journalists in Gaza following the latest attack, Ireti and Atiyyah, at the NASA medical complex. We showed what seemed to be a deliberate and targeted attack on journalists and first responders in what we understand to have been a double-tap operation. In other words, two simultaneous attacks. The Israeli government is calling it a tragic mishap. Of course, we know the IDF says they've killed 6 terrorists during that particular operation. What do you think, or why do you think this moment, above all of the others, Atiyyah, represents a watershed moment in the way that this conflict is being framed, the way that Israel particularly is being framed?
I think the reason that it's so different from before is because there is accountability being taken in this particular attack and the one with Anas al-Sharif before, but also how do you commit a mistake more than once? There's news from the Gaza media office that it was actually 3 strikes. And by the time this news gets out, everybody has already reported on it, you know. So for me, I've been trying to verify double or triple, but either way, it was repeatedly. And the other thing about it is the journalist was standing on the staircase to get Wi-Fi. That is the reason that staircase was bombed, was because they were there trying to get Wi-Fi. Why were they trying to get Wi-Fi? Because they were trying to report. So it's very, it's very clear that this is a targeted attack, and we need to make sure that we understand that targeted attacks did not start now. The targeted attacks have been happening on journalists, but I think we've only been paying attention recently. But actually, if you go up to 20 years ago, you'll find evidence of this happening.
In fact, at some point in our conversation, we'll take us back to 1967 and some of the historic incidents involving journalists. When you talk about a triple tap, essentially, I think there was a timeline that was released just recently where in the second attack, there were 2 attacks just moments apart, which then accounts for the 3. But what was interesting, Ireti, in the way that we're timelining this now is it seemed as if the first attack happened, there was a pause of about 9 minutes to allow those first responders and media to get in there to report and to cover when the second or the third wave hit. Your thoughts?
That's what makes it so sinister. Thank you for having me and good morning. That's what makes it so sinister because, you know, they had already hit. And we must say that Israel has now released a statement saying they were looking for Hamas camera. I don't know what a Hamas camera is. I've been in journalism for over, I don't know, almost 2 decades now. I don't know about you. Perhaps you know what an Hamas camera is. But they say they were trying to bomb a Hamas camera. So they're trying to bomb an Hamas camera and then first tap, knowing full well that immediately, because the moment you bomb a site, all the first responders are going to go there. And of course, the press is going to follow them. They do exactly as they would. And Israel knew exactly what they would do. And then Israel decides to strike again. That tells me, and that is, if anybody is in any doubt, if there's need for any kind of confirmation, there is your confirmation. The fact is somebody was actually focused on that particular site, on that staircase, haven't struck it. And then, knowing that people were standing there, innocent civilians, first responders, journalists, knowing they were there, seeing what was going on, and then decides to strike again. That, in my opinion, is an assassination. It is murder. It's something, it's a crime, not just a crime against international law. It's a crime against humanity. on so many levels. It's a crime that if none of us stand up against, it actually, everything that's been happening in Gaza, indeed everything that's been happening in Palestine for the last 77 years continues to stain us as human beings.
Right.
But there's no getting away from this one.
Ireti, we'll come back.
It's there, it's in your face.
We'll come back to accountability in just a moment. I want to go back to the history, Atiyyah, and we can do that together. We don't even have to go very far, and you perhaps can just recount for us some of the recent events that echo and mimic some of the trends that we're seeing in what's happened over the last couple of days. But if we think about the historic targeting and suppression of Palestinian journalists and how this has evolved, we go all the way back to the Six-Day War, 1967, and what many now in hindsight, and I think that's also what Ireti is touching on, seems to reflect a continuous strategy by Israeli authorities to control the narrative, but chillingly to limit the voices of Palestinians.
Yeah, so this is something I'm very interested in because I feel like this is something we need to really be focusing on. I tried to go back as far as like 1948, which is when the so-called Israeli territories were created by the, by the split, And I think that when you start looking back, and this information is available, it's just not completely put together in one document, you will find that there have been journalists killed in car strikes, snipers shot dead ahead, like straight, just shot, as they are being now. Like the other day, there was someone who was just shot by the IOF. So it has been happening. And what's also very interesting is that Hamas was blamed since Hamas came into power, they were blamed as the reason as the journalists working for Hamas, which is the reason which is the line they take all the time. So when you start realizing this pattern has been existing for close to for decades, then you're like, oh, why did we not pick up on this before? Why was no one saying anything before? The biggest case was probably Shireen Abu Akleh, who was targeted by the sniper and who Israel denied outright. And, similar to the way Ashley Creel on our end in Cape Town's funeral was disturbed during apartheid, so was Shireen Abu Akleh's funeral, disturbed. So the thing is, we're not connecting these dots. As journalists, we need to do the work to connect this history together to show that this extends for decades and the same line of reasoning is taken every time.
Let's talk, okay, well, let's go then to this line of reasoning then. Okay, let's pick up that thread for now. When we think about media censorship, Ireti, when we think about travel restrictions and the labeling in this context of journalists as Hamas militants, they have functioned, it would seem historically, as a tool of systemic or systematic silencing, not just lethal targeting. What impact does it have on the ability of the world to witness what is happening?
Well, first and foremost, we all know if you silence journalists, you literally kill the story. You're killing the story, you're killing the voices of millions, but importantly, you are covering up, and that is what Israel intended to do. Israel doesn't want any eyewitnesses. For decades, journalists have been eyewitnesses at the ICJ, indeed at the ICC. That's what journalism is. It's eyewitness reporting. It's putting the truth out as best as you can from what you can see to everybody else so they're aware. So you raise awareness, you raise consciousness, indeed, you raise knowledge, and then nobody's forgotten. What Israel wants is for everybody not to know, the whole world, not to know what's going on in Gaza, and indeed to forget about the plight of the Palestinians, by extension, the Gazans. And that's why this, what you call systemic and systematic strategy, continues on and on and on. But fundamentally, even more so, because they've been getting away with it. Let's be honest, we did all forget. Up until October 7th, yes, we knew, but other things are taking over. We're all moving on with life. As if there wasn't a people just like us, who are going through this struggle. So since October 7th, Israel realized they could no longer hide. And the Palestinians did something, which was, we are not going to let you forget. We are going to put that information out there over and over and over again, because that is also part of our resistance. We survive because we resist.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things we would do. So that's an answer for you. But also is, when Israel is allowed, and indeed any country, when Israel is allowed to label any journalist a terrorist and gets away with it, just think about it. That means every one of us is in danger. I went to Israel post-October 7th. I was invited to Israel post-October 7th. Hamas could easily have called me a terrorist from the other side. That would have put my life in danger. So this is why we can't keep quiet about this.
Yeah.
It is fundamental to everything that we stand for and what we do, and indeed to our safety.
Yeah.
If the
I wanna
Palestinians are not safe, we are not safe.
Ireti, and again, I'm so sorry to have interjected you there. Atiyyah, let's bring it back to the fact that Israel reportedly does not allow international news organizations to report freely in Gaza. We know that the CPJ has talked about 100, or placed the number at 190 journalists killed in the 22 months since this all began, mostly Palestinians. But also concerningly, journalists in organizations like CNN, BBC, Reuters, for example, alleging Israeli bias and double standards, the violation of journalistic principles, and so on. The list is endless. What is the responsibility of international news agencies, in fact, everyone in the space who cares about journalism and the work of journalists? What is their responsibility now?
So one of the main focuses has been on manufacturing content and how Israel uses the media to manufacture content for their actions. And in that way, they act with complete impunity. So they have not allowed independent or foreign media into Gaza since the 7th of October. And the only time they do is when they get to choose who they want to come in. So by that, they almost take them on their own tour of what happens, and so they get to guide the narrative. They get to show them, they show them what they think is possible. They also have banned Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera released a really incredible documentary that has journalists undercover. You don't see their names or faces, but they've worked at the CNN and BBC speaking about how they were co-opted into pushing one narrative. The other thing I want to say is the figure for me is closer to 300. Even the figure of the casualties is not around the 60,000s. That figure is estimated to be double by a Lancet report. So we also need to realize that with people dying, with no hospitals, with no one there to count bodies, we don't really, these figures are actually not,
They
accurate.
might be much bigger than what we understand them to be. Ireti, you pulled on the thread of accountability. The UN says it condemns what happened, and we're just only talking about recent events, mind you. The UK calls it horrific and indefensible. France says it's intolerable. Germany says it is shocked. But as we reflect on accountability, what does the impunity with which Israel is able to continue doing what it is doing reveal about the weaknesses of international institutions? And we can just pick, the UN or the ICC for starters.
Yes, so first and foremost, from a personal point of view, I am bored with all the platitudes. I'm shocked. I condemn, It's it's a nonsense. They mean nothing. Nothing, because there are no actions that follow. I mean, it's shocking to me that Germany said they're shocked. The same Germany that said Israel was doing their work for them, I paraphrase. So, well, we talk about accountability, yes. Yesterday, I watched a video, and I've forgotten his name now. I meant to write it down. Yesterday, I watched a video that instructed on how the UN could respond to this live genocide. how the UN could actually, how Antonio Guterres could actually mobilize the members, the General Assembly, mind you, not necessarily the UNGA, the UNSC, the General Assembly, how the General Assembly all could be rallied together to rise up the way they rose up against apartheid in South Africa. But alas, Antonio Guterres isn't doing that. And you've got to ask yourself, but why hasn't he done that?
Yeah.
What is going on? Indeed, one of the things that was mentioned, the points that was raised is that the Arab countries, it doesn't need somebody from the UNSC to do it. Anybody could raise and do it. So when we talk about impunity, this is part of the impunity, whether directly or indirectly, whether intentional or not. Every day that goes by is giving Israel the license to pivot and raise the bar to the atrocities that's going on there. Now, coming back to the ICC, I interviewed Gabriela Paradil, who is the president of the IFJ. And she is pushing. Indeed, the other thing they're pushing for is to actually make the killing journalists itself a crime. They're pushing that. So it's not actually wrapped into international, because we must talk about international law. International law is weak, because even when it gets passed, who is going to enforce it? Nobody's going to enforce it, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be another way to ensure this accountability is actually in the hands of the people, not in the hands of the bureaucrats.
Right. Ireti, I'm going to come out there. That was the International Federation of Journalists that you were referring to there. Atiyyah, how do journalists manage bias in a story like this, where there are very strong feelings and it can come over to the public as if there is already a line that is being supported and it will be reported on in that way, no matter what? Our commitment as journalists is always to balance accuracy and to fairness.
So I think we are still committed to the truth. The reason the journalists are being killed is because they're reporting the truth. And the truth is something that can't be handled, and the truth is something that's trying to be hidden. So I think I talk about, you know, were journalists expected to be taking one side or be completely neutral during the Holocaust? I mean, like, we can see the complete obliteration of human beings. This is where social media has come in, is we can actually see what is happening. So we are all a judge of what's happening. And the thing is, like, it's up to us to try and tell both sides, but at the same time, there is a line, you know, and the line has been crossed, especially when our colleagues are being murdered through this genocide.
Atiyyah Khan, thank you for joining us this morning. Appreciate you. Ireti Bakare-Yusuf joining us from Nigeria there as well. Thank you for your time.